It's no secret that combat is one of the more uninspired parts of Skyrim. Others have pointed out what they consider to be the main problems with it. I'm not here for that, since doing so would be beating a dead horse, or rather, a skeleton at this point. I'm here to try and salvage the vanilla combat system and possibly make it more interesting. Let's get started. Traditional Skyrim combat usually looks like this. You run up to an enemy and start laying down the left click. Then you survive for long enough to kill the enemy. This second part usually requires either grinding out at least one crafting skill in higher difficulties, or relying on overpowered perks or abilities. But what if you could fight without having to grind crafting or relying on these overpowered abilities? Take this hypothetical situation for an example. Let's say I want to fight a giant at the start of the game with a melee weapon. Conventional Skyrim wisdom of gluing myself to the enemy and trading paint until one of us drops would not get me far, as I would just be one-tapped by the giant. Now, despite the absence of the mythical dodge roll, it is quite possible to consistently dodge the giant's attacks and respond with a few hits of your own during the resulting openings. And just like that, the fight went from being impossible to being tedious and most likely not worth your time, but still doable. So we accomplished the same thing that would have taken us quite a bit of grinding to get to had we used the traditional approach. And sure, the fights are probably going to take longer, but I prefer this to grinding. But that could just be me. As a side effect of our dodging, we also incorporated a bit more interactivity into the combat by baiting attacks and creating openings we can then exploit. The natural question then becomes, how far can this be taken? If you've tried to fiddle around with dodging in vanilla, chances are you run into this problem when fighting enemies that use one-handed weapons. Their regular attacks can be avoided without too much trouble. But then, this happens, and you know you're taking one to the dome. The problem is, of course, that in their repurposing of player animations for NPCs, the devs didn't give you any counter to the 10 feet lunge. There's no telegraphing, and the lunge can come at any time. It's a power attack, so blocking it is about the equivalent of getting hit by a normal attack, and there's no ability that would give us a quick burst of speed so we can avoid it. The only thing that could be considered a counter is the bash, which also doesn't really work in practice. Your mileage may vary, but I wasn't able to bash a single lunge coming my way. If I use my professionally made graph, you can see this is the range of a normal attack, and this is the range of the lunge. If we stay in normal attack range of the NPC, we will always be hit by the lunge because there is no way to cover enough distance in time to avoid it. To counter this, we treat every attack as a lunge and stay barely in range of it, which finally enables us to avoid it, and as an added bonus, create an opportunity to deal some damage. So we bait, step back, and punish. Again, conventional Skyrim wisdom would have you trade, but there's no better trade than getting something for nothing. Actually, there might be stealing, now that I think about it. Moving on, fighting NPCs with two-handed weapons is where this technique really shines, and almost looks like it was intentionally added into the game. If you're only gonna try this technique against one type of enemy, try it against these. Even as the second slowest character in the game, I'm able to consistently land punches between the enemy's attacks. Keep in mind that great swords and battle axes swing faster than a warhammer, so be extra careful around those. If you want to be completely safe, only retaliate after they use a power attack. Now would also be a good time to talk about the dreaded Killcam. Another case of repurposed assets, the Killcam is why Skyrim often gets a bad rap for its hitboxes. You're keeping your distance, not getting hit, when you suddenly get snapped out of existence without having any chance to react. The enemy's attack doesn't have to land, the animation for it doesn't even have to start for you to be killed. As far as I can tell, the game simply checks if your HP is lower than the damage of the current attack, and plays a Killcam if it is. This is why you always have to keep your HP higher than the damage your opponent can deal, power attack bonus included, or you run the risk of being sent to the Shadow Realm. Mind crush! Fortunately, only NPCs and dragons can snipe you with a Killcam. On the other hand, that's a good chunk of enemies. Alright, moving on to archers. First, get used to dodging arrows. They always pause for a bit before releasing an arrow. Just sidestep as they release and you'll be fine. Then you can get up close as they knock an arrow and circle around them. You could also go in and out of melee range to force them to switch to a dagger. And finally, you could also use my ultimate cheese I used against the Ebony Warrior.
Watch this.
But there's no need to do so unless you're dealing with a high level opponent. Next up, Draugr. Basically a slower version of NPCs. Wait for their power attack and punish. You could also sneak an attack or two between their normal attacks, but this is not 100% safe. The only thing you have to watch is this attack, because you might get caught by the second half of it. Just learn the difference between the two attacks and you'll have no problems. Here are the two side by side. Draugr with two-handed weapons. Essentially the same thing. They attack, you dodge, and respond with 2 hits. Again, the only thing you have to worry about is the double attack that might catch you off guard. If you're fighting multiple Draugr at the same time, always try to bait them into a tight space, where they can't use their numbers against you. And finally, Draugr archers, all the techniques used against normal archers apply. Avoiding attacks like this also doesn't depend on the level of the Draugr you're facing, so it could be used against high level Draugr with the same effectiveness. And a quick tip if they're using disarm. Hotkey your weapon and unequip it just before the shout lands. That way you don't have to go fumbling around for your sword. Sheathing is not quick enough, you have to use a hotkey. Skeletons and Ash Spawn are just Draugr reskins, so the exact same techniques apply. One thing to keep in mind when facing Ash Spawn: Their swords are longer than the model would have you believe. As you can see here, I don't think this attack should have hit me. I already did a separate video on giants, but I'll redo them here as well. You can either use the spin to win technique, or the one I showed you at the start of the video. The same applies to frost giants and lurkers as well. Funnily enough, mammoths are also vulnerable to the spin to win technique. Once you flank them, they're helpless unless you make a mistake. Spiders. They always close in just enough to be able to attack you, so you only need to back off a bit to avoid the attack. Be ready to dodge their poisonous pit at any time though. Also, this isn't as much of a problem with bigger spiders as they are faster, but when fighting smaller spiders, watch out for their jump attack. You have to find a sweet spot of being just barely in range of their normal attacks, so as not to provoke the jump. Because if they jump, you're pretty much dead. Fighting trolls is very similar to fighting Draugr. You have to be able to do some decent damage for it to stick though, or otherwise prevent them from regenerating by using fire. Dwemer spheres seem intimidating at the start, but you can reliably dodge their attacks simply by strafing. Just remember to always move sideways and they'll never be able to hit you. Centurions are also incredibly easy to dodge. It's as simple as walking right up to them and circling. Spiders are actually the most troublesome Dwemer constructs. If you want to fight them without taking any damage, keep your distance, avoid the jumps, and counterattack twice. Spriggans, you can either fight them as you would a Dwemer sphere, or you could spin to win. Impressive root system, by the way. Falmer, again similar to what we've seen before. Wait for the power attack and then respond. The most effective way of fighting Chorus is to simply walk backwards and start running as soon as you see them jump. This way you can safely land almost every hit. And try to make a better effort at dodging the poison than I did here. Chorus hunters are a bit more mobile, but they still fall to the same tactic. I found the wood elf a bit too slow for that. So I tried circling and it seemed to work fine. And finally Ewoks. Both fall to the slight variations of the spin to win technique. The mounted ones can cover quite a bit of distance when lunging, so be aware of that. Bears and sabercats both move and attack really quickly, and they're extremely difficult to dodge. You can, however, outmaneuver them with some difficulty, but I'm not sure if it's worth the effort. Ice raids aren't technically difficult, but they are incredibly annoying to deal with. That's why I put them in the Jank category. You close in an attack until you hear this, then you simply run away. Rinse and repeat. The astute among you may have noticed that this technique relies on keeping your distance and being patient, which is essentially hard countered by any magic-wielding enemy, as magic and especially stream spells are next to impossible to dodge. As much as I hate to admit it, we're forced to stack magic resistances in trade. To add insult to injury, vampires can not only damage you from afar, but they also heal up in the process. There is some trickery you can do to increase your chances of survival if the enemy doesn't have a weapon on him. Wolves are also my nemesis, as I have not found a reliable way of dodging their attacks. Fortunately, they're not that strong, so you can just trade under normal circumstances.
Get up, son of a bitch!
Shouts are a good addition to any build, but they are essential to no crafting builds. The only problem is, of course, To get them, we need to kill dragons. Even though dragons use shouts which deal magic damage, there's a way to fight them without stacking magic resistances. I mainly faced dragons during my level 1 challenge, so I got tunnel visions into fighting them by stacking magic resistances and damaging them while they are shouting. This requires jumping through quite a bit of hoops to get enough fire resistance to be able to fight them. However, a Reddit user suggested a much more elegant approach which flew over my head, that does not require any magic resistance if performed perfectly. The bites can be avoided just by strafing, and when you see he's about to shout, you simply bash. And like I said, if performed perfectly, you should not lose any HP at all. When fighting these low-level dragons, the only thing you really have to worry about is not to fall below 110 HP, so you don't get sniped by a Killcam. And there you go, how to fight almost every single enemy in the game. Use these techniques to improve any and all of your builds, or not. It's up to you. To showcase just how powerful dodging is, I'll be uploading a no crafting two-handed build next, so be on the lookout for that. Until then, have a good one.